Hey, Adam from BNE Lens, and today I'm going to show you waterfalls that are less than 8 kilometres from Brisbane city centre. That's 5 miles if you're metric illiterate. I'm also going to show you how to take amazing waterfall photos and why you might not always want to use a slow shutter speed. Anyway, be sure to subscribe to this channel for more content like this and let me know in the comments what you'd like to see more of. Okay, roll intro. Dun, dun. We've had some really good rain here in Brisbane the last few days, so I thought it'd be a great time to come to JC's Slaughter Falls to try and get a really nice waterfall pic, because the water doesn't always flow here, so now is the time. So let's do it. Okay, so I've made it to the falls now, so it's time to get down to taking some photos. Now thankfully it's quite an overcast day, so that gives a nice even light. I'm really praying that the sun doesn't come out before I get my shots. And really the things to consider when you're taking waterfall shots are the shutter speed. You want a good shutter speed to get that silky smooth water look. And also composition. Composition is really important because the waterfall isn't enough in itself. You've got to have the environment, the elements around the waterfall working together within the frame to create a really nice looking composition. But I'm going to probably talk more about this after I get home. For now I'm just going to get down to actually taking the photos. So talk to you soon. Okay, so I'm back home. I've got all of my photos in the computer. Let's talk about how to take great photos of waterfalls. Obviously, you're going to need a camera, that goes without saying, but the second thing that also almost goes without saying, and that is you need a tripod. Doesn't have to be an amazing, expensive, fancy tripod. All it's got to be is just a cheap tripod, anything that's going to keep your camera stable. Because with the shutter speeds that we're going to be using, it's going to be impossible to hold it steady with your hands and not end up with really blurry images, which you do not want. Okay, so that's the gear. There's one more piece of gear that will be very, very useful, and that is one of these. This is what we call a variable neutral density filter. Long name, an ND filter for short. What it is something that allows you to limit the amount of light that comes into your camera lens. So you screw it on the front of the lens, and as you turn it, it will get brighter or darker. That is, it's letting more or less light into the lens. I actually have one on the camera I'm recording this tutorial with, and you'll see as I turn it, I get darker and darker and darker, and then start getting lighter again. Okay, how is that? Should be pretty good. Okay, so that's a neutral density filter. What that allows you to do is to actually take long exposures, that is, have the shutter open for a long amount of time at any time of day. It doesn't matter how bright it actually is, you're going to be able to do it. Without an ND filter, you're limited to how long your exposure time can be, because it'll actually just be too bright if you leave the shutter open for too long. And with these waterfall photos, for most of them, we're going to actually want a very long shutter speed. Not all though, so stay tuned because there will be times that you want a really fast shutter speed as well. But we'll talk about that later. All right, so let's look at the, those eye candy, beautiful, stunning, smooth, silky waterfall photos like this one. These are the kind of photos most people want to be able to take. So I'm going to tell you how to do that. What you need to do is make sure that you have a slow shutter speed, because ultimately what you want is for the shutter to open as the water flows by and allow the water to completely flow past the lens before it shuts again, and it'll be recording that whole journey of the water, which makes it look really smooth. You get those smooth lines coming through rather than kind of individual dots of water. This image here was taken with a 2.5 second shutter speed. A lot of the time you're probably not going to want to be quite that slow, because it can start getting a bit muddy and milky and you start losing detail in the flow of the water after a while. But for this particular one, I wanted the bottom part where the water is running into that kind of little pond area. I wanted that to be not too distracting, so I actually chose a slightly longer shutter speed for this particular image. So this one is taken 2.5 second shutter speed with an aperture of 22, so that's f22. It's a very small aperture. A lot of the purists would not take a photo at f22 because they'll tell you that the sharpness of the lens is not as good when it's that small. They say that the ideal of most lenses is somewhere around between 8 and 16. So a lot of people, when they're doing landscapey kind of photos, are actually going to not really go much past f16 because they'll say that actually the image becomes less sharp. But honestly, unless you are printing those photos and blowing them up to a massive size, you're not likely to see much difference between f16 and f22, except that f22 will have a deeper depth of field. But you're going to get enough depth of field at f16 as well. But for me, I just wanted to limit the light as much as I could, so I chose 22. Although using a neutral density filter, you've got more flexibility with your aperture. Now, I told you that you need to be a little bit careful not to have a shutter speed that is too long. So I'm going to show you an example of that. So this one is a shutter speed of 10 seconds. So I had the shutter open for 10 seconds, and what you'll find is if you zoom into the waterfall itself here, you'll see that it's quite milky and you're kind of losing a little bit of detail in some of these areas. You lose the flow of the water, it just becomes a bit of a blur. So this is what I would say is a shutter speed that is too long. This is 10 seconds. So I did actually make a conscious decision to have this shutter speed, and I'll tell you why in a moment. But let's, just for comparison's sake, let's look at a much faster shutter speed at the same point of the waterfall. You'll see that you can see that flow of water here much more clearly. So this one, this is 0.6 of a second. For comparison, 0.6 of a second and 10 seconds. Now you might like this 10-second one more. You might like that effect. But a lot of people would say, yeah, but I can't even see that it's water really. So you can make the decision. I mean, it's a creative choice and it's up to you where you set your shutter speed. And you can have it anywhere in between. It's up to you. And the beautiful thing if you're shooting digital is you can see on the spot how it's going to look at any particular shutter speed. So you can always just try out different shutter speeds, check it in the back of the screen. So 1/6 of a second is probably better for the waterfall itself. Now I told you that the 10-second was a choice that I made, and I'll show you why. if you zoom out of this 1/6 of a second and look at the pond area here, or well, just the river further down, you'll see that this is a little bit distracting, just the bubbles here and the flow here. For me, it kind of detracts from the waterfall itself, and it's a little distracting. So I thought, I want to take that away. I want to have a more blurred out kind of flow in that part of the river. So that's why I chose a 10-second exposure. So if you look at the same area of water in the 10-second photo, it's completely different. It's much more blurred out, and I kind of like this look. Now what I could do is actually do both of them and combine them in Photoshop so that I get this waterfall with this, bit further down the river. Up to you. For this particular image, I played around with it even more. I went a little bit crazy and I decided to make it look more like autumn. And I like this one. And for me, the front part is a little bit less distracting when you change the colors like that. But anyway, that's for a Photoshop tutorial rather than a how to shoot waterfalls tutorial. So that's, different shutter speeds, but anywhere from about 1/4 of a second all the way to 1 second, somewhere in there is generally going to be your ideal shutter speed. And when it comes to waterfalls, shutter speed is going to be your most important consideration. Of course, you want a good depth of field so that you have sharpness in the foreground, in the middle, in the background. So you're going to want a fairly small aperture as well. And that small aperture will help you to have a longer shutter speed as well. But in the end, use a neutral density filter and then you've got complete flexibility. All right, now I told you that you're not always going to want to have a slow shutter speed. Sometimes you might want a really fast shutter speed. Why? Because sometimes you might actually want to freeze the motion of the water. Because if you look at waterfalls really closely, you'll find that the water has this beautiful kind of glassy look when there's only a little bit of water falling. So when you've got a lot of water running and you get that white water, then that is generally going to look best with a slow shutter speed. But when you've only got a little bit of water, you might want to freeze it and capture that really glassy kind of look of the water. So let me show you an example of that. So this was just a very small flow of water. And so here I chose to use a very fast shutter speed to freeze it. So it looks like it's frozen, it looks like ice or glass, and I really like that look as well. If you're so focused on getting those silky smooth, long exposure flowing waterfall photos, you can miss interesting, different kind of photos like this one. So this one, I actually went mega fast. This is 1/2500th of a second, which is a little bit overkill to be honest. But if you shoot around 1,000th of a second, even 1/500th of a second, you can get this kind of effect. So that's another thing to consider is maybe you don't always want to have a silky waterfall. Maybe you want a fast shutter speed to capture that kind of glassy look. Another photo where you can see that is this one, where you can see I've just focused in on I've got a very shallow depth of field, but you can see the way that freezing the motion of the water has a completely different effect, which is also quite pleasing. It's quite cool. So don't get so obsessed with the silky ones, with the slow shutter speed, that you miss out on the opportunity to try taking different kind of photos with fast shutter speeds, because they can be just as interesting and possibly even more interesting because not many people are doing it. They're all taking the slow silky ones. Anyway, that's something about visiting waterfalls, but you know what? Don't get so hung up on photographing the waterfalls themselves that you forget to look around and just take beautiful photos of the setting and other parts of the view in those areas. I mean, simple things can be quite cool, like this simple photo of a leaf on a rock. It's a leaf on a rock at the edge of the water, but for me, I think it's really pretty. So always look around and look for those things that might catch your eye, and don't forget to take pictures of other things when you visit the waterfalls. So that would be my advice to you. JC Slaughter waterfalls are really good falls to visit and take all kinds of photos of all kinds of things, not just the falls themselves. Definitely worth the trip. It's a short walk from the car park to the falls area, and you can actually keep walking all the way up the mountain to Mount Coot-tha Lookout. So it's a great walk, great place to visit. That's about it for me. As I said at the beginning, don't forget to subscribe if you're not already. If you got something out of the video, please let me know what was useful in it. What did you learn? What was helpful? What did you enjoy? And also let me know if there's something else you want to learn about, whether it's something about photography or something about Brisbane. Also let me know in the comments. I'm happy to help out with that. Apart from that, end of video time to get all awkward and never know what to say. So see ya, hang around for the next video, and yeah, all of that stuff. Like, subscribe, bye.